Start recording. Stop. Camera chooser. Back facing. Button. Hi everybody. Welcome back to my channel. Um, I decided to make a video about how my experience was when I went to school from K through 12. My K through 12 experience. I'll do another experience about college. That's a whole separate thing. But K through 12. So I went to a normal school, like a normal city school. I didn't go to Ohio State School for the Blind or anything like that. Nothing against those schools, just I went to a standard one. And I was the only completely blind person in my class, in my whole school system, really. I think there was one other visually impaired person. He had some visual impairment. He was there for a couple years. He was one grade older than me, and then he left. So, but he wasn't completely blind like me. But starting off kindergarten, I did everything anybody else did. I stood around. We had a morning and afternoon. I was in morning kindergarten, and what I would do is after my kindergarten class was done is when I would just do my lessons with my Braille teacher, my teacher for the visually impaired anyway. Um, and that's when we would do stuff like learning Braille and stuff. But as later years went on, we started doing it during other times of the day. Whenever she was available to get there, we set up times. Unfortunately, in fourth and fifth grade, I ended up having to stay after school to do Braille lessons. But excuse me, I had to do that for a while. And then what we started doing is just during non-essential classes like chorus or gym or something like that, I would do it so I wouldn't have to stay after school. So, um, but I learned like everybody else, except for I was just not doing it visually. I had I had all my books. I was able to usually get all my books in Braille. I don't exactly remember where they came from, or where they got it from. I was very young, so I didn't take part in ordering them. But they were all in Braille. A lot of them had multiple volumes, and I had a bigger desk than everybody else, so I can keep my Brailler, my Perkins Brailler, my Braille paper, and stuff on it. Um, so it was very accessible for me. Um, then, excuse me. So learning Braille was the biggest thing, and when we had to do spelling tests, the difference things for me was I had to make sure I could write the word, like if the word was end, I had to spell it out E-N-D, and then I had to write it a second time using E-N contraction and a D to make sure I knew how to do it both ways. So um, I had to do that when I did spelling tests, so it was a little bit different than me, a little bit different than, someone who's sighted. So they needed to make sure I knew how to write them in both ways, or Braille them both ways, rather. Um, and so, and then we also, during my teacher for the visually impaired, we had this curriculum book that we followed, and we used to read stories, random stories, and other things like that for practice. Every time I met her, we'd have these worksheets and all that type of stuff. Um, and so then as time went on, I would say I was like in, I would say fifth grade in year two, or let me back up a little, sorry. For computer class, what I had was, I had something from K through 5 called Deck Talk, which I don't even think it's around anymore. But it would just talk and I would just type for me to type. It wasn't something I could go on the internet with. I just would type and practice typing. And in K through second grade, I had a Braille keyboard, but then eventually later on, I didn't need it, and I don't need it now. Um, Not opposed to anybody who does. But and then back in 2000, then in 2000 is when I started, my teacher wanted to start implementing JAWS. And so that's when I started learning how to use JAWS. And at the time, I wanted nothing to do with computers. I wasn't interested. I was just like, I didn't even want to go on the internet or anything like that. So But then I got into it a lot once I got into college, and I'm on the internet every day now, and you pretty much have to be. So, so that was a long time ago. But and so with tests, I was given extra amount of time to take them because often they do take a little bit extra amount of time. It happened in college too. And I usually took them in the classroom. They mostly didn't take me. They didn't usually take me longer, um, except for math tests. Sometimes took me a little bit longer. So math tests ended up taking me a little bit longer than the others because of working out the problems and stuff like that. So if I needed extra time on a test, usually if the period ran out, I would take it during my time with my teacher for the visually impaired. So that's how I would do that. Um, and then when I got into, and then as far as traveling, I took the bus K through 5, walked to the bus stop, and then 6 through middle school through my senior year of high school, I walked to school. It wasn't too far. Good exercise. I practiced it a couple of times with my dad. He walked me around and took me around to the school route. He showed me how to do it and practiced it a number of times for a couple weeks. And then I just started walking to and from school every day. So in the cold and in the warm weather, unless it was really, really cold or really snowy. Um, so once middle school hit, that's when we started like changing periods, like having multiple teachers for different things. Well, fifth grade actually, but more so in middle school, more so in sixth grade. That's when we started, and so and again, the same thing would apply as it did in elementary school. I would go to all the other classes, and then during other things, during the other extracurricular activities like art, which obviously art, there are blind people who do art, but it wasn't really my thing, and it's not an essential activity. So I did my a lesson for the visually impaired during those types of classes. That is also when I did my orientation mobility when in middle school and high school. Now K through 5, I don't exactly remember. I think they just picked random times during the day, and that's when I did it. My mobility instructor came twice a week. So in K through 5, I was mostly learning how to. K through 5, I used to learn how to walk around my school building and continuously do that. And then as I got older, we would do some street crossings and stuff like that. Um, K through 5, yeah, when I was like third, fourth grade, we did do some street crossings. And then as time went on, we went more towards traffic lights, but I don't really feel very comfortable doing those right now by myself, which people should. People should know how to do it. So but I don't do it very often, so I'm not really 100% comfortable with it. Um, so there is that, but it wasn't something that was like not practiced. Um, and I even did practice taking a bus. My orientation mobility instructor dropped me off somewhere, and I had to catch a bus and take it home. And I got off at the right bus stop and walked the rest of the way home. Um, but that's another thing. That's another thing for travel. Um, high school now. Here's high school. Moving on from middle school to high school, um, things were obviously more in their classes were of course more intense as you got on, and so there was more material to cover. And what I ended up doing starting in middle school and actually started in middle school and in high school, went through high schools, started using recorded RFB&D recording books for the blind and visually impaired. RFB&D or RFB&B, whatever. Um, and I started using that for all my tapes or all my book recordings anyway, and books that I had to read because it would take forever to read them all in Braille. Some of them I had in Braille that we read in class, but others that were just like books we had to read at home. And then in my junior and senior year, we started using this thing called the Telex Scholar, which was like a CD player, and you could access different parts of the books and stuff like that towards by using different commands. I don't remember how to use it, of course, now, but I remember it was a really cool device. So it was a really cool device. Um, and then, of course, when it came to taking all the standard tests in Ohio, we have the Ohio graduation test and all. Again, I would do that separately from everybody else. I would do it separately only with my mobility instructor, or not, excuse me, my Braille teacher for the visually impaired. And we would do those and separately. And of course, like other tests, I would get some extra time on them. So now, as far as library goes, they had some books in Braille for me that I can take out whenever I wanted to. Um, they were just I had like The Mouse and the Motorcycle, which I love that book still. I think I still have it on tape actually. And I love the sequel, Runaway Ralph. It's an awesome one. That and then I had a couple Amelia Bedelia books and a couple other stuff here and there that I could just read or take home whenever for like sighted people could check out other books. Obviously, I didn't have as much of a variety, but that's what I did for library. Once we were in sixth grade, we didn't have any library requirements, so that was only K through 5. So, um, and then for lunch, they would usually let me go to lunch early. They would usually let me go to lunch early, just so I wouldn't have to stand in a line, which now that I think about it, they really didn't have to do that. But they did to just so I wouldn't have to stand in line, and I'd always have someone walk me to my table with my, I would usually have someone walk me to my table with my tray so I don't drop it. I could take it to the garbage can myself, but then I couldn't, but just to the table, they didn't want me to. And in elementary school, my 2 elementary schools I went to, I always had a certain spot that I always sat, so I knew where my table was. Um, and really, even in high school, I did too. Even though wasn't required to. None of the places I was required to, but I just did just to make it easy for me. So I always had a certain spot that I would always. But then again, most kids, and a lot of kids in school, I'm sure, have their tables they normally sit at with their normal group of friends. So I didn't really have an actual group of friends I hung out with on a regular basis. For a while, I did. I tried, but I was a different type of person, so I didn't have as many friends because it wasn't necessarily because of my visual impairment. Part of it could have been, but part of it could have been just my personality. Because I was always a very prim and proper person, which I still am. I've always acted older than my age and everything like that. So it's always been, um, I always had difficulty interacting with my peers because I acted older than my age all the time. And so, they like they're all cussing and everything like that. You won't ever hear me talk like that. There's people my age who still talk like that. But so I never really got along with a lot of my peers too well. So sometimes I tried to interact a little bit, but it didn't always work. When I was in elementary school, it was a little bit better. But then middle school and high school's work got a little bit more difficult. So, um, but that's pretty much my experience being visually impaired. I didn't. One thing I didn't cover is there were no braille labels on the doors. I never even asked, except for in my one elementary school, the bathrooms were labeled. It said boy on whatever bathroom was a boy bathroom, and that's all. I never really asked for any braille labels because I just memorized where all my rooms were. It wasn't a huge. Neither of the schools were huge, so don't forget I live in a city that my class only had less than 100 people in it, so it's a very small city. So, um, but so that's my school experience. Um, I'd love to hear everybody else's, if you're visually impaired or not. So talk to you guys in my next video. Camera chooser. Stop recording. Button.